Well, the next question then I get is, were there dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, and would they fit? And this is where the critics say, I got you here. No way could you possibly fit dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. No way, because dinosaurs are so big, can't fit. But then you got to ask the critic two questions. How big was the ark, and how many animals, including the dinosaurs, had to go on it? And if you do these calculations, you'll find it's not a problem. You see, the ark was very big. We don't have to guess. The Bible tells us 300 cubits by 50 by 30. We don't know exactly how big a cubit was, but we do know at minimum it would be 17.5 inches, which means the smallest possible ark would be 437 feet by 73 by 44 feet tall. It was enormous. It could have been a little bit bigger than that as well. It was huge. See, people have misconceptions about the ark. And I'm sorry to say the church sometimes is responsible for some of these misconceptions by painting little pictures like this, little bathtub arks. And they're all cutesy and everything, and all the animals are packed on there, and they're all happy and smiling, even though the world's being destroyed. But in any case, see, the real ark was enormous, had the same capacity as 522 railroad stock cars. We need to get out of our minds these silly little bathtub arks and get the biblical ark in our mind. You can imagine Noah's surprise if he had the design, if God gave him the design for the little bathtub ark, he'd be pretty shocked, wouldn't he? And by the way, Noah didn't have to design the ark, he just had to build it. God designed the ark. God told Noah the specifications for it. And little bathtub arks like that tip over very easily, but no, the real ark, the ark that God designed, was designed for stability and seaworthiness. It was optimally designed to weather a flood, really. So the ark was absolutely enormous, but was it big enough? How many animals would you have to go on it, including those dinosaurs? Would those dinosaurs fit? Well, keep in mind, folks, we don't need to put 2 deerhounds and dachshunds and 2 Dalmatians, 2 lion dogs. We certainly don't need poodles on board the ark, right? No, all you need is 2 dogs. That's all you need, because you can get all these different breeds from 2 dogs. What's the same way with the dinosaurs? You don't need 2 Triceratops, 2 Leptoceratops, 2 Penosaurus, 2 Monoclonius. You don't need all those different, what are probably breeds, but in any case, we think they're all the same Genesis kind. So you just need 2 ceratopsians, 2 of that kind of dinosaur. And so although there are over 600 dinosaur names, we think there are only about 50 Genesis kinds, and you can get a lot of those different breeds afterwards. So only about 100 dinosaurs on board the ark. Well, would they fit? How could you get those big dinosaurs in the ark? Well, keep in mind, although some dinosaurs got very big, most of them were very small, like little Compsognathus, which is about the size of a chicken. So dinosaurs, average size might have been the size of a sheep or pony, something like that. They weren't that big on average. Now, there were a few kinds that got pretty big, like the big sauropods, and those tended to get very, very big. But if you think about it, even the largest sauropod dinosaur started out very small, because dinosaurs laid eggs. The largest eggs we find are about this big. It turns out you can't make an egg bigger than that anyway, physically, because as you make the egg bigger, you have to make the shell thicker to support its own weight. And then if you make the shell too thick, you can't get oxygen into it. So you can't make an egg bigger than a certain size. Physically, it doesn't work. So of course the dinosaur eggs couldn't be much bigger than that, which means when the dinosaurs first hatched, how big were they? About this big. They got to fit in that egg. So that even the largest sauropods started out very small. Now, the only purpose for having the animals on board the ark was to preserve their kinds. All they had to do was reproduce after the flood. So do you think God would have taken the oldest and largest dinosaurs? Not at all. Why would he take senior citizens when he could take just these young ones, right? It makes sense if their only purpose is to reproduce after the flood. So if we added up the mammals, well, the mammals there are about 7,000 kinds if we estimate the number of kinds. Birds, maybe 4,000 to 5,000. Reptiles, including the dinosaurs, 3,000 to 4,000 reptiles. We add them up, about 16,000 animals on board the ark, only 100 of which are dinosaurs. We calculate the space available. We know the space available, the Bible tells us. We estimate the space required from each of the kinds. Birds don't take up too much space because they're small. Mammals take up the most because they're the most of them. The reptiles, including the dinosaurs, only take up about 15% of the ark, maybe 16%. So the animals would have taken up about half of the ark, about half. And you say, well, what's the other half for? Well, not only for people, but also for food. They had to put food on board the ark. And I think there was room for more people on board the ark. Now, God knew which people would reject him, but from our perspective, so that he would say that, he didn't decline salvation to anyone, he might have made it big enough for more people as well. So there's plenty of room on board the ark. Not a problem to get those dinosaurs on board the ark, especially if Noah had taken youngsters, young adults. By the way, God called the animals. God caused the animals to come. 2 of every kind will come to thee, the Bible says. So if dinosaurs got on board the ark, they must have gotten off the ark. So did dinosaurs survive the flood? Well, they must have. Now granted, the flood killed off almost everything, but there were representative kinds of all the air-breathing land animals on board the ark. And so that means the dinosaurs, as Genesis kinds, would have survived the flood. Of course, most of the fossils we find would have been deposited during the flood, the dinosaurs that weren't on board the Ark. That being the case, would you expect to find some legends of dinosaurs in history? Keeping in mind they're not going to be called dinosaurs, that's a modern word, but would we find legends of dragons? Do we find legends of dragons? You bet. We find lots of legends of dragons, like the legend of St. George and the dragon. The legend goes that St. George came into this town. The town was being victimized by a dragon that was eating their livestock, and they were actually going to sacrifice a lady to this dragon, hoping to appease it. St. George rides in, slays the dragon, and saves the lady, converts the town to Christianity. People say, oh, that's just a myth. Well, maybe. On the other hand, maybe this was a real creature that he came in and killed. Maybe it was a dinosaur. We've actually found fossils of baryonyx, a sort of a type of dinosaur in that region. Did you know that Marco Polo in AD 1271 reported that the Chinese royal chariots were occasionally pulled by dragons? In the year 1611, the Chinese emperor appointed the position of royal dragon feeder, which hardly makes sense if there were no dragons to feed, doesn't it? 1611, not that long ago, really, certainly not millions of years ago. And there are lots of legends of various dragons. There's a city in France that was renamed in the honor of the killing of a dragon there. The animal is described as being larger than an ox and had long, sharp, pointed horns on its head. Sounds a little bit like a triceratops, doesn't it? Around the year 900, there was an Irish writer who recorded an encounter with a large animal. The creature had a head shaped somewhat like a horse's and had iron on its tail that pointed backwards. It had thick legs and strong claws. The description matches known dinosaurs such as Stegosaurus and Kentrosaurus. Can't be sure, but it sure sounds like one. This one's a really well-documented case. On May 13th, 1572, around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there was an Italian peasant who was walking behind his cart. His oxen were pulling the cart, and they got down on the road because there was a little hissing dragon up in front of them. And the man actually had a rod with him at the time. It was actually a small creature, and he came up and whacked it on its head and killed it. And he brought the body into a naturalist at the time, Ulysses Aldrovandus, who carefully studied the carcass and reported that it was unquestionably a reptile, one unlike any others he had seen. It had a very long, slender neck and a thick body. The description fits that of a Tanistropheus. So we think we might actually know what species it was from the description. What about the flying reptiles? Any records of those? Well, we do have records of flying reptiles in recorded history. The Greek historian Herodotus records an encounter with these winged serpents, flying reptiles. He says he finds out about this place where there are lots of these flying reptiles, which sound an awful lot like Rhamphorhynchus, one of these small flying reptiles that had the long tail. And he goes to this valley to find out about them. He says, I went to learn about the winged serpents. When I arrived there, I saw innumerable bones and backbones of serpents, many heaps of backbones, great and small and even smaller. Winged serpents are said to fly from Arabia at the beginning of spring, making for Egypt, but the ibis birds encountered the invaders in this pass and killed them. And the legends say that the Egyptians used to worship the ibis birds because the ibis birds killed the Rhamphorhynchus. The Rhamphorhynchus were poisonous, so it did them a little service, and the Egyptians worshipped the ibis birds for that. He says the serpents are like water snakes. Their wings are not feathered, but very like the wings of a bat. So he's going out of his way to say this isn't a bird. It's not feathered. It's got wings like a bat, membranous kind of wings, and it's a serpent, therefore a reptile. Flying reptile, really amazing. But you know, it's not just legends, it's not just historical accounts. We actually find some ancient drawings, some ancient paintings of dinosaurs. You probably know that some people in the past painted on cave walls, and they paint things like people and buffalo and dinosaurs. Did you know that? Here's some from various places around the world, cave paintings of dinosaurs. Now they've enhanced it a little bit for you on the PowerPoint, just so you can see it. But it looks an awful lot like a sauropod dinosaur with the 4 legs and the long neck and the long tail. Here's one. I think this is from Utah. Really amazing. In the 15th century, we have Bishop Bell's tomb, Carlisle Cathedral. Now we know this is from 15th century. We know when he died, so we know how old this is. This is before dinosaur fossils had really been found. Dinosaur fossils weren't found in bulk until really the 1800s. And if you look on this tomb, there are these little brass strips along the side. And if we zoom in on those, we actually find there are little animals carved in those strips. And some of those animals look like dinosaurs. They look an awful lot like sauropod dinosaurs. Really amazing, the different animals that they've carved into there. A lot of them are just animals that were alive today that you'd recognize, but some of them look a lot like dinosaurs. The Australian Aborigines painted this painting of a creature they think lives in Lake Galilee. They won't go near the lake because they're afraid of it. Interesting. Looks an awful lot like a plesiosaur, one of the not a true dinosaur, but one of the ones that had the flippers and lived in the water. Lots of legends of lake monsters and things of that sort. You've probably heard of Loch Ness, but I think there are some better cases, really. There's a creature that's often reported in the Hawkesbury River near Sydney. There's Yaru is the name for the Australian Aboriginal creature. The Australian Aborigines also have a word called bunyip, which means monster, and their descriptions resemble bipedal dinosaurs, that is, walked on two legs, bipedal reptiles, possibly Tyrannosaurus or Allosaurus, one of those kinds. We don't know specifically what it would be. There are quite a lot of legends like that. Mokalian bimbi is one that's quite popular to hear about. There's a legend of a large creature that lives in the African Congo, and eyewitness reports are as recent as 1990. The descriptions and sketches resemble a sauropod dinosaur. Now, again, we can't be sure. We can't be sure that these are accurate because we don't have a photograph of this, and as nice as that would be. But it is interesting that these things might have lived very, very recently, much more recently than a lot of people think. Makes you wonder even if some of these might even be alive today. And evolutionists say, oh, no way could dinosaurs be alive today. But wait a minute. Here I have a picture of a Wollemi pine. This is a particular pine tree that is found in the same layers of rock as dinosaurs. It's supposedly millions of years old by evolutionist reasoning. And they thought that it had gone extinct millions of years ago. Well, guess what? They're still alive today. They found them in some remote places in Australia. They're still alive. It's like finding a living dinosaur, they said. Now, it's a tree, though. A tree can't run away and hide, and yet it evaded detection until recently. Do you think it's possible there might be some creatures that we haven't discovered? See, an evolutionist might dismiss that out of hand, but a creationist can say maybe, maybe. And of course, there are a lot of things that evolutionists say lived at the time of the dinosaurs, like crocodiles that are alive today, and coelacanths, a kind of fish that were thought to have been extinct for millions of years. They're still alive today. So it makes you wonder. Of course, many kinds of dinosaurs, and perhaps all of them, are extinct. And people ask, well, why did they die then? Why did the dinosaurs die off? Well, there are lots of reasons why things die off. And if you think about it, it's not just the dinosaurs. Lots of things have gone extinct since creation. As far as we can tell, there aren't trilobites around anymore. And they were apparently once abundant on this earth. Why do things go extinct? Well, it could be disease, could be famine, hunted to extinction. That's one that people don't think about for dinosaurs, but I read a lot of reports, a lot of legends of heroes going out and slaying dragons. Maybe we hunted some kinds to extinction. That's something to think about. And of course, there are changes in environment. There are lots of reasons why things go extinct. Now today, we have endangered species programs to protect some of the animals that are on the verge of extinction. Maybe we didn't start those programs soon enough. Maybe the dinosaurs would still be around today if we had endangered species programs in the past. But in any case, ultimately the reason dinosaurs went extinct, ultimately the reason things die is because of sin. And now all the world, all the creation suffers and groans under that bondage of corruption, and awaits deliverance from that bondage of corruption. And so you see, really, dinosaurs point to the gospel message, don't they? They remind us that we live in a cursed, fallen world. The reason these wonderful animals that God created for us to enjoy, the reason they're not around anymore is because we rebelled against Him, is because we didn't want to play by His rules. And He backed away and removed a little bit of His sustaining power. And it's because that we live in a world that's separated from God by sin that we need a way back to God. And that way is Jesus Christ, who took our pain, who took our penalty for sin on the cross. So you see, when you start from the Bible and you use the Bible to explain dinosaurs, it makes sense. There's not a mystery. The Bible makes sense of dinosaurs. And we can sum it up. We can sum up the biblical history of dinosaurs with the 5 F's. We talked about the 7 C's of history. Here's the 5 F's of dinosaurs. They were formed back at creation. God made these wonderful creatures, some of them gentle giants, some of them very small. But in any case, these wonderful creatures for us to enjoy. Originally, they were vegetarian. The Bible makes that very clear. Fallen, because Adam sinned. The world fell. Adam fell. And the dinosaurs became corrupted along with everything else. All nature groans under that bondage of corruption. There was the flood. And undoubtedly, a lot of the fossils that we find today, probably the bulk of them, were laid down during Noah's flood. But there were representative kinds of dinosaurs on board that ark. And so they would have survived as Genesis kinds. They faded. The numbers of dinosaurs diminished after the flood at some point until there are very few and possibly none left. And finally, they were passed down only in memory. And maybe some of those memories got exaggerated a bit, and people combined different aspects of various kinds of extinct reptiles. And then finally, they were found. Dinosaurs were rediscovered in the 1800s. Really, the first fossils found around then. So you see, when you start from the Bible, when you view the world through biblical glasses, it makes a lot of sense. When you start from the Bible and you use that to understand dinosaurs, it fits. It makes sense. And that's really what we're all about at Answers in Genesis. We're about reconnecting the Bible to the real world. We want to show people this book is not just a collection of interesting stories. It's true. It happened. And you see, you can make sense of the world if you start from this book. If you start from God's Word, it makes sense. And I want to continue to encourage you to trust in the authority of God's Word. Thank you.